During the past decade, there have been many major scandals involving doctors who have molested both male and female patients at colleges and universities. At the University of Southern California, Dr. Tyndall; at UCLA, Dr. Heaps; at the University of Michigan, Dr. Anderson; and at Ohio State University, Dr. Strauss. There are also major cases ongoing that involve doctors who have molested hundreds of children in clinics. And in Pennsylvania, Dr. Johnny Bardo. The Roman Catholic Church, the military, the Boy Scouts, colleges, and universities, they all have withered under the spotlight of sexual misconduct scandals and promised that abuse will no longer be swept under the carpet. The medical profession, however, has never taken on sexual misconduct as a significant priority, and layer upon layer of secrecy makes it nearly impossible for the public or even the medical community itself to know the extent of physician sexual abuse. In a national investigation, the Justice in America network TV series staff examined documents that describe disturbing acts of physician sexual abuse in every state. Rapes by OB/GYNs, seductions by psychiatrists, fondling by anesthesiologists and ophthalmologists, and molestations by pediatricians and radiologists. Some doctors were disciplined over a single episode of sexual misconduct. A few physicians with hundreds of victims are among the nation's worst sex offenders. But the toll can't be measured by numbers alone. For patients, the violations can be life-altering. The betrayal even pushed some to suicide. How do doctors get away with exploiting patients for years? Because some victims say nothing. Intimidated, confused, or embarrassed, they fear that no one will take their word over a doctor's. Colleagues and nurses stay silent. Hospitals and healthcare organizations brush off accusations or quietly push doctors out, the investigation found, without reporting them to police or licensing agencies. Society condemns sexual misconduct by most citizens and demands punishment. But when a physician is the perpetrator, the nation often looks the other way. Physician-dominated medical boards give offenders second chances. Prosecutors dismissed or reduced charges so doctors could keep practicing and stay off sex offender registries. Communities rallied around them. The medical profession has never taken on sexual misconduct as a significant priority. Over and over again, records show predatory physicians took advantage of a doctor's special privilege, the daily practice of asking trusting people to disrobe in a private room and permit themselves to be touched. Sexual conduct between a doctor and a patient, even if ostensibly consensual, is strictly forbidden. In ethical terms, it's a never event. In a legal sense, it can be a crime. Physicians know it's a line that can't be crossed. Its prohibition is as old as the Hippocratic Oath. Only 11 states have a law requiring medical authorities to report to police or prosecutors when they suspect a sexual crime has been committed against an adult. Secrecy is the enemy, and that enemy is at work today when it comes to abusive doctors. It takes dedicated lawyers like Manley, Stewart, and Finaldi to hold them accountable and obtain compensation for their victims. They will discuss a broken system that forgives sexually abusive doctors in every state, why a national tracking system doesn't show the extent of physician sexual misconduct, why sexual misconduct is difficult to uncover, how predatory physicians get away with their crimes, what constitutes a sexual assault, how often do medical professionals commit acts of sexual assault against patients, who is liable if you are sexually assaulted by a doctor, what you should do if you were sexually assaulted by your doctor, and other relevant and important issues. In this insider exclusive Justice in America Network TV special, Justice in America, America's Predator Doctors Crisis, Our news team is on location with John Manley, founder and partner at Manley, Stewart and Finaldi, and Morgan Stewart, partner, and Courtney Thom, as well as some of their clients, to discuss these issues. Manley, Stewart and Finaldi is the nation's leading firm representing patients sexually assaulted by doctors. They have recovered nearly $2.5 billion in compensation for patients since 2018. They have served or are serving as lead counsel in these cases. Dozens of officials at the USAG, the USOC, and MSU resigned under pressure or were fired. Some faced criminal charges, though few were convicted. The scandal led to the Protecting Young Victims from Sexual Abuse. In 2018, MSU agreed to pay $500 million to settle lawsuits accusing university leaders, including its president and athletic director, of enabling Nassar's abuse. In 2021, the USOPC and the USAG settled lawsuits brought by more than 500 athletes for $380 million. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Orange County, California. It is my great pleasure to introduce John Manley and Morgan Stewart to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve.
Tell our audience, John, and I've known you for many, many years, but tell our audience a little bit about your firm. What's your primary practice?
So our firm, Manley, Stewart and Finaldi, specializes in childhood sexual abuse and adult sexual abuse. So what we do is we represent victims and survivors of sexual abuse, ranging from small children all the way to adults who are sexually assaulted. Mm-hmm. And we've been doing that work since 1997.
Right, and you've had cases, Morgan, that span schools, churches, the Boy Scouts, the whole 9 yards, the Olympics, right? What do you find the toughest part to prosecuting these cases?
The emotional aspect. I mean, it's tangible and real to victims of, you're not just dealing with corporations, you're dealing with people's lives, and that's probably the toughest part of litigating the cases. There are still people, John, that don't want to come forward after they've been sexually abused because they're shamed, right? How do you deal with that? How do you convince somebody that they should get justice?
I don't want to try to convince anybody to do this. What I want to do is give them their options, and if filing a lawsuit to hold their perpetrator and the institutions that enabled them accountable is part of that process, we're happy to do it. What I say to clients is, and I think the perception is by a lot of people that lawyers and clients in these cases are just chasing money. That's not what we do. And I tell our clients, look, what you want to chase is healing. A jury can smell in 2 seconds if your goal is money. For the vast majority of our clients, they want some kind of accountability and justice. And by doing that, in a way, it can be very healing. Forcing your perpetrator to sit across the table from you, or even on a Zoom, and having a lawyer ask the serious questions that need to be asked, can be very empowering and very healing. And the reality is that when this happens to you as a child or as an adult, it's essentially emotional murder. It affects you for the rest of your life. So we want to be a part of that process to bring accountability and healing, by what we do. And I think I'm proud to say we're exceptionally good at it.
As you both know, I've done a lot of cases, different practices, and I remember 15 years ago when we first met, I realized that to you, this is a mission. So I remember when I was interviewing the folks at the Innocence Project, and I was asking them, how much longer are you going to do this? My question to you is, you'll do it forever, won't you?
Yeah, sadly, I think Morgan and I and others in the firm all agree that we could do this forever because there's no shortage of it. And what I've discovered doing this over the last 30 years is this is a no bullshit public health problem. We have a serious problem in this country with adults abusing children. It's in institutions. And frankly, the laws and the courts haven't dealt with it appropriately. And I think a lot of if you go to prisons, if you look at homelessness, if you look at a lot of the social ills that plague this country, what you're going to find is a huge majority of those people were sexually assaulted as children.
It's a public health problem. Okay, what's the solution?
Well, I think the answer is, number one is, for example, teachers. Teachers get a background check when they're hired, and then no one looks at them again. The number of public school teachers that are being arrested for this across the country is staggering. When I started doing these cases, if you'd have told me that we have districts where we have not a few, but dozens of perpetrators in public schools, I would have been shocked. It's commonplace for people to believe that if you prove somebody abused somebody, then you win. That's not what it is. That's not the way it works. In order to show liability, also known as civil guilt, of a school district or an institution that harbors a pedophile, you have to show either negligence or they knew or should have known that this person was abusing children. In every one of these cases that we try or settle, we've proved that there was knowledge, that the institution knew and hid it.
And that's a big question I want to ask you. Proved. How? Because oftentimes complaints will be issued, correct? Mm-hmm. And somebody will have a forgetful memory. I don't remember that. Or they won't investigate it. How do you prove it?
Number one, you prove frequently the survivor themselves reports. Mm-hmm. So if the survivor reports, that's enough. But oftentimes it's the documents. I mean, you'd be stunned at how often there's a report to a principal, a vice principal, another teacher, all of whom...
All documented,
all in their documents, and they do nothing. They're all mandatory reporters under the law.
Now, we've talked about what the administrators should do. Let's talk about some of the clients that you've represented. After you settle a case, win a case, do you keep in contact? Do they keep in contact with you?
I keep in contact with clients going back 10, 15 years.
The other question is, no matter how much money someone gets, they still may be troubled. You and I have talked about this many times. They may have dysfunctional relationship with other people throughout their life. Yeah. They may become addicts, using alcohol. How do you deal with that?
What makes us different is that, we're not car crash lawyers. We're not product liability lawyers. We're not business lawyers. This is all we do. The law in this area is complex, and I think largely because of some of our larger settlements, we've seen a lot of other lawyers who do all kinds of various other things market themselves as sexual abuse lawyers. And they're free to do that. The problem with that is that, number one, you don't understand the law. Number two, you can't bring a client and go, well, what did he do to you? Did he rape you? You don't do that. This is, what happened to these people is incredibly traumatic, and you want to be very careful how you speak to them. You want them to hopefully only have to tell their story once. And you don't want this process to re-traumatize them. So, we struggle very hard to make sure that the client gets the help they need, both in the process and afterwards. The whole point of the money is to get them the help they need to recover their humanity. What most people don't really appreciate is, and I say it all the time, sexuality is part of our humanity. It's the way we express love. And when you take somebody's ability away to love, it's profound. And so we're very conscious of that. And this is, for us, this is not just another case. It's our vocation. It's what we do. And everybody in this firm, to a person, believes in our mission.
It is my great pleasure to introduce Audrey Nathaker. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
John, tell us a little bit about the case that involved Audrey.
So Audrey is a survivor of Dr. George Tyndall at USC.
And what was his official title there?
He was the staff gynecologist at the USC Health Center for over 30 years. And while Audrey was a law student, he assaulted her. What Dr. Tyndall was doing is assaulting his victims under the guise of medical care. He would act like this was normal gynecological practice, when in fact it was far from it. But many of the women were very young. Audrey was in her early 20s, and sometimes it was the first time they'd ever been to a gynecologist, so they didn't know what to expect. Many of the young women were there, especially the undergraduates, for contraceptives, and they just wanted the pill. And for example, in most instances, unless there's some history of gynecological complications, nobody does a pelvic exam to give a young woman the pill, even in the 80s. And Dr. Tyndall would force these women to undergo these pelvic exams. Many times he did not use gloves. Many times he engaged in unnecessary procedures that were painful. He was photographing young women naked. He would force them to strip all the way down. There were no chaperones in the room. And USC became aware of this very early on.
What made you decide to go public early in the game?
I was going to a day of sailing with my children. They were young girls at the time with my husband. I saw the news on my phone. I saw his picture, and in that moment in time, I realized what had happened to me. I realized that USC had kept him on for almost 30 years. I realized that there were countless other survivors, and I knew in that moment, that's it. I'm going to speak out. I can't believe this has even occurred.
When you initially spoke out, who did you speak to?
So the first time I spoke publicly was on the Today Show.
I think that's right.
The Today Show. It was very early on, and I was still kind of coming to terms with everything, honestly. And I was there with, I think, 5 of us were on the Today Show, and we were interviewed, and it was scary. I mean, it was definitely scary, but my mind was set. Like, I was not gonna allow USC to get away with this, or him to get away with this. And I've seen so many sex crime survivors. I put them on the stand myself. I've walked these women, children, men through the fires of trials. I have seen the toll this has taken on people's lives, and I was gonna be damned if it was gonna happen again.
Yeah,
So,
would you say that this was a motivation for you becoming a sex crimes prosecutor?
not necessarily. I didn't like what had happened to me, but I didn't fully understand what Tyndall had done to me at the time.
So you did not file a complaint with USC?
I was not one of the ones that complained. I got my records. I took them with me when I graduated in '92, and I carried them with me for the next 30 years because I planned on complaining, but I didn't fully understand. It was my first full-blown gynecological exam. I knew there were some problems. I didn't like him taking pictures of me and me helping him take pictures of me.
What I can tell you about doctors who abuse their patients, they are very good at normalizing what they do. So it's abuse under the guise of medical care, and many women didn't realize what he was doing. Dr. Tyndall was a disgusting, vile pervert whose office was so filthy they had to go literally remove flies from it. He had shoeboxes full of these photographs of naked students the DA found. And when your photograph is taken like that, even if it's in the 80s, you wonder, is it on the web? What's he doing with it? Is he selling it? Nobody consented to that. And like I said, USC was aware of it for many, many years and actually tried to cover it up. He was finally fired in 2016, I believe. USC paid him money. They paid him around $200,000 to go away. And the reason is they didn't want this to come out. And he threatened to sue him.
What do you have to say to all the victims out there who feel ashamed, who feel that nobody's going to believe them, what do you suggest to them?
Everyone's got to make their own, everybody has to choose their own path and how they're going to come forward. But I would say this, be courageous, know your truth, and speak your truth if you can. Find other survivors to come alongside you and to be with. Nobody wants to be alone. I mean, no survivor wants to be the first person to put their hand up. Yeah. That's from my work experience and also from this experience. It's better to be in the company of other survivors if that's possible.
Well, congratulations for coming forward, and also congratulations on time was in your favor.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.